Sarte On Theater, assembled, edited, introduced, and annotated by Michael Contat and Michael Rybalka, translated from the French by Frank Jelinek, read by Vincent Bagnall. No exit. There are always accidental causes and primary concerns involved in the writing of a play. The accidental cause is that when I wrote No Exit in 1943 and early 1944, I had 3 friends, and I wanted them to perform a play of mine, without giving any one of them a better part than the others. And that meant that I had to have all of them on the stage at the same time, and all of them had to remain there. Because I thought if one of them goes off, he will be thinking as he exits that the others have better parts than he has. So, I wanted to keep them together. And I asked myself how one could keep 3 people together and never let one of them go off, and how to keep them together to the end, as if for eternity. Thereupon it occurred to me to put them in hell, and make each of them the other's torturer. This was the accidental cause. I should mention that, as it turned out, my 3 friends did not perform the play. The parts were taken by Witold, Tanya Balachova, and Gabi Sylvia. But at the time, there were also more general concerns. What I wanted to express in the play was something beyond what was simply dictated by the circumstances. And what I wanted to say was that hell is other people. But hell is other people has always been misunderstood. It has been thought that what I mean by that was that our relations with other people are always poisoned, that they are invariably hellish relations. But what I really mean is something totally different. I mean that if relations with someone else are twisted, then that other person can only be hell. Why? Because other people are basically the most important means we have in ourselves for our own knowledge of ourselves. When we think about ourselves, when we try to know ourselves, basically we use the knowledge of us, which other people already have. We judge ourselves with the means other people have, and have given us for judging ourselves. Into whatever I say about myself, someone else's judgment always enters. Into whatever I feel within myself, someone else's judgment enters. Which means that if my relations are bad, I am situating myself in a total dependence on someone else, and then I am indeed in hell. And there are a vast number of people in the world who are in hell because they are too dependent on the judgment of other people. But that does not at all mean that one cannot have relations with other people. It simply brings out the capital importance of all other people for each one of us. The second point I wanted to make is that these people are not like us. The 3 persons you will be hearing in No Exit do not resemble us, inasmuch as we are alive and they are dead. Naturally, dead symbolizes something here. What I was wanting to imply specifically is that many people are encrusted in a set of habits and customs that they harbor judgments about them, which make them suffer, but do not even try to change them, and that such people are to all intents and purposes dead. Dead in the sense that they cannot break out of the frame of their worries, their concerns, and their habits, and that they therefore continue in many cases to be the victims of judgments passed on them by other people. From that standpoint, they quite obviously are cowards or villains. If they were cowards in the first place, nothing can alter the fact that they were cowards. That is why they are dead. That is the reason. It is a way of saying that to be enwrapped in a perpetual care for judgments and actions which you do not want to change, is a living death. So that in point of fact, since we are alive, I wanted to show by means of the absurd the importance of freedom to us. That is to say, the importance of changing acts by other acts. No matter what the circle of hell we are living in, I think we are free to break out of it. And if people do not break out, again, they are staying there of their own free will. So that of their own free will, they put themselves in hell. So you see that relations with other people, encrustation, and freedom as the other face of the coin, which is barely suggested, are the three themes in the play. I should like you to remember this when you hear that hell is other people. I should like to add in conclusion that I had a very rare stroke of luck, very rare for dramatists, that at the first performance in 1944, the roles were played by the three actors and also by Chauffeur, the major domo of hell, who has invariably acted him ever since, so extremely well, that I have never afterwards been able to imagine my own creations save as Witold, Gaby Sylvia, Tanya Balachova, and Chauffeur. The play has been revived since then with other actors, and I would like to place on record that I have seen Christiane Lenière act Inez and thought her admirable in the part. Theatre and Cinema. Notes for a lecture delivered at the sanatorium at Buffemont on May 6, 1958. Number 1, theatre is a social art, which produces collective facts. Its character derives, therefore, as much or more from the section of society controlling it as from the author. Whereas in a film, we have actors in action ready canned, so to speak. Theatre is a true event, a jam session, an event at once ordinary and unique. Number 2, but in most societies nowadays, this event has a structure peculiar to itself, not everywhere perhaps, but today I shall call this presentation. The audience takes part in a social event, but for this very reason it does not take part in the story which is being related. This is presented to it. You get more participation in a film than you do in a play. You have the film directly before you. The actors are live, but in film the actor is closer, close-ups, the naked face, example, Robert Aldrich's Kiss Me Deadly. B, the film actor dominates the audience. He is above it. The audience is flattened, low-angle shots. In the theatre, this Superman aspect, the sensation of the actor's size and weight, does not exist. C, guided vision. I am made to see what they want me to see. Our perception of things is directed. In the theatre, by contrast, you look at whomever you want to. This is why it is so hard for actors to control their faces while someone else is speaking. The theatre, therefore, has more freedom. D, consequence of absolute proximity in the film. A strict adjustment of person to part. Appearance merges with reality. In the theatre, it hardly worries you for a moment to see Madeleine Renaud as a 20-year-old widow. For what counts is not that she is a widow of 20, but is acting here? Where are the beauty and youth? They are not there. What is there is the significance of gesture. It is not a presence, but a kind of absence, a kind of intangible ghost. The absent object is enveloped in the gesture. You believe it is still there. A film is a landscape. The Californian desert in Stroheim's Greed is a thing, a real and very tangible object, an environment. Later, there enter the characters who are to die there. In a sentimental film, landscape is a mood which creates its interpreters. A film depicts men who are in the world and are conditioned by it. The opposite happens in theater. Beckett and mime. The decor in the film holds the man and destroys or saves him. In the Peking opera, the feel of a river, boats, danger, night is suggested by the action. Theater then presents action by a man on the stage to men in the audience. And through this action, both the world he lives in and the performer of the action. This does not imply voluntarism. It means that everything, even failure, impotence, or death, must be signaled as acts. But what is an action? Number one, an initial situation directly or indirectly endangers an individual or a social group. Two, the individual or the social group plan for a means to cause external changes so that the danger shall no longer exist. 3. The action is everything brought to bear on the external world and thereby on the individual or group themselves in order to achieve this end by specific means. The aim is to show by the action of a human body upon itself the determining circumstances, the ends and means. In the theater, action is gesture, but not in film. This is not a real action exerted on real objects, but a gesture of presentation, presenting the action as its primary meaning, and through it the world, in perspective, as its secondary meaning. Puppets. Everything, even youth and beauty, derives from gesture and is appearance. A. The play within the play. People are acting a comedy to a supposed audience. Here the comedy itself is appearance. B. Genet and the Maids. Even though Genet denounces illusion, he would like to maintain the character of pure presentation. Here you get the individual himself as appearance presented to real individuals who exist as performance. Hegel and pathos. Action in the theater reveals the feelings. Hermione's hatred, jealousy, and desperate love appear in the act by which she sends Orestes to kill Pyrrhus. Speech is the clearest gesture, that is, the clearest representation of the act. But you must realize that in theater, speech is necessarily the presentation of an act. Eloquence and theater. Theater, therefore, is a presentation of a man to men by means of imaginary actions. Result, a distance. Personal example, the victors had too much violence in it. But this distance in presentation endows the universe presented with a different sort of coherence. It is out of your reach. You cannot act upon it or stop it. Thus it shows us that we have no power over it. I can join with others, raise an uproar against a play, and prevent the actors from coming on stage, but this is merely preventing something real, an economic and social fact, just as I can smash a record. But I cannot smash the symphony or the dramatic object. Its originality is due to this. Though there is no participation, there is at least a discovery, at times the anguished discovery of someone beyond our reach, rushing on his fate, and we can do nothing to stop him. In the film, we are the hero. We are part of him. We rush on our own fate. In the theater, we remain outside and the hero meets his fate before our eyes. But the impact on us and our feelings is all the stronger in that the hero is also ourselves, even if outside us. Brecht's plays. Brecht's aim is to show modern man to us, his contemporaries, through gestures presenting action by him. A distancing or alienation effect, exploiting a contradiction. The man presented is myself, but without power over myself. That is, making us discover ourselves as others, as if other people were looking at us. In other words, achieving an objectivity which I cannot get from my reflection. In film nowadays, participation excludes observation and explanation. In theater, just the reverse. B. Choice of subject. Epic theater. Replacing the conflicts of the classical drama by contradictions. This person then presented to us is ourself as social man, but he is also presented to us removed from his context. This enables me to understand my contradictions, that is to say, those of my time, through a face which is alien to me and does not affect me. As Brecht sees it, our inner contradictions and the contradictions between us and other persons are never accidental. Fundamentally, they express the contradictions of society. The action of the individual characters, therefore, must present our world to us as rent by social contradictions, or in short, as individuals and individual actions, they must demonstrate the major social currents and their significance. Hence, theater is epic. It is never the enterprise of a single individual. It is the enterprise of society through him. Example, the maidservant in the Caucasian chalk circle is given not speech, but gestures to present love. Maternal love is a permanent explanation, but it has to be found, not felt. The author, the play, and the audience. Why did you write The Condemned of Altona? I don't mean this particular play, but why, if you had something to say, did you choose the theater as the medium in which to say it? The fourth volume was to be about the resistance. The choice was easy enough at the time, though it needed a good deal of perseverance and hard work to stick to it. One was either for or against the Germans. It was black or white. Nowadays, ever since 1945, things have become complicated. You need less courage to choose, perhaps, but the choices are far harder. I cannot express the ambiguities of our time in this novel, since it would be about the situation in 1943, and yet this unfinished work bothers me. I find it hard to start another one before I finish it. Do you feel that you reach a wider public through the theater than through the novel? If a play is a success, the author reaches a wider public, for the time being, at least. Afterwards, I don't know. At any rate, a play that runs for 100 nights in a large theater and is a hit has reached an audience of 100,000. 100,000 readers is quite exceptional. You have already had a circulation of far more than 100,000 in pocket books, and each book has more than one reader. Of course, you can read a play as well as see it. The pocketbook edition you mentioned has already published several of my plays. There are also road companies and revivals. But you have to remember that it's not quite the same thing. A book's success is not necessarily measured by the number of copies it sells. I know of excellent books whose circulation has never exceeded 3,000 or 4,000, yet they have influenced a whole generation, indirectly at any rate. Kafka is not a bestseller in France, but the whole of my generation of intellectuals would not be what they are without him. A play is an expensive business and has to show an immediate profit, and it must therefore either be an immediate hit or else disappear for good. That means that the author's relation to his public is different. A book gains its public gradually. A work for the theater has necessarily to be theatrical, because the author knows that he will be applauded or hissed at once. It's like an exam you can only take once and never again. More and more, a play is coming to be something like an assault on the public. If it fails, it recoils on its author. In the United States, and for some time now in France, if the criticisms are bad and the box office slack, a play is taken off after a few performances. A book can speak in a murmur. Drama and comedy have to shout. This may be what attracts me about the theater. The assault and the heightened tone and the risk of losing everything in a single night. It forces me to speak in another way. It makes a change. What do you think your audience expects from your drama? Well, I am wondering about that. The theater is so much of a public interest, the interest of the public, that a play is out of the author's hands once the public enters the theater. My plays, at all events, whatever their success or failure, have almost all passed out of my hands. They become objects. After one says, I didn't mean that, like William II during the 1914 war. But when you've done it, there it is. That's obviously true of films. At any rate, if films ever do have a meaning of their own, the public distorts their meaning or discovers another meaning. But with plays, can't the playwright take a hand, change the staging, pull it together in places, give it a different direction? No. What you suddenly find when you come to watch a play is that the devil takes a hand. It would be too facile to put it down to the director or the actors. A play has to be able to be revived, to be produced abroad, so it must be able to stand being acted by actors who do not quite get inside the character's skin. Each part and the play as a whole should have a fairly definite margin for variations. What counts is something else. First, the unexpected interrelations which arise within the acts and scenes between 1,000 things, gestures, attitudes, the character's behavior, the time and place of the action, the scenery, the lighting, and so on. You can do something about all these, but nothing that is very effective. An object is created with its objective characteristics, and they get away from you. In The Devil and the Good Lord, I had most of the scenes taking place in the evening or at night. One day I noticed, as I was watching one of the final rehearsals, that the sequence of these nocturnal scenes made it a night play. Now, that is exactly the sort of thing that an audience discovers and likes or dislikes before the author does, even if it is not wholly conscious of its discovery. I also remember a scene in The Victors. Troopers of the Milices were torturing people of the resistance in 1944. What I was trying to do was not to show the physical reality of torture, but the relations between these two groups and the conflicts between them. And we, Vitold, the actor and director, the other actors, and myself, got on very well. The rehearsals had been good-tempered. Vitold never had time for dinner and always took advantage of the moment when he was led off stage to grab a sandwich and bolt it. He had to shriek with pain in the wings, and he always had his mouth full when he shrieked. But that never prevented us from believing in the scene. And then, at the dress rehearsal, some of the audience found that moment unbearable. I discovered through them, and I confess I was astounded. The true value of classical discretion: you must not show everything. You know what some painters say nowadays, that a picture is primarily an object. Well, a play in performance is primarily an object with an organization entirely of its own. But it's the audience that works with the author to bring about the transformation. Do you always agree with the transformation? No. But what can I do about it? An audience is primarily an assembly. That is to say, each member of an audience asks himself what he thinks of the play, and at the same time, what his neighbor is thinking. When I go to the theater and listen to a play in which some lines perhaps shock people who nevertheless do not share my views, and I feel that as I sit there I do not have my full freedom of judgment, I am embarrassed for them. They themselves would be less shocked if they were not thinking of other members of the audience who are of the same party or same social circle or the same faith as they are. From this variable reaction arises an alien reality for which no one is wholly responsible. Here the press comes in. It does not, as people believe, create this line of thought, but interprets and crystallizes it. Playwrights tend to blame it for turning some of the public away from their plays, but this is a misconception. The drama critic of a daily or weekly paper is in fact the skilled representative of a fraction of this public. He is only listened to if his judgment is on the whole confirmed by his readers' ideas. In other words, it is as if he divined the opinion of the people who will read him, precisely because he himself is one of them. When Dirty Hands was produced, François Perrier and André Lujouet were greatly and very rightly applauded. There was some hesitation about the play itself, whether it was or was not anti-communist. The critics both of the left and of the bourgeois press waited. And when the former at last decided it was directed against their party, which I had not intended in the least, the latter acclaimed it as a weapon of war, and so proved them right. And after that, the play took on an objective meaning which I have never been able to change. But haven't you had an opportunity since then to tell people what you really had intended? I did, but I was wasting my breath. Intentions don't count in the theater. What counts is what comes out. The audience writes the play quite as much as the author does. And of course there is the element that affects an audience, the particular time, its needs, the conflicts it itself is aware of. For instance, people imagined that Coriolanus was an anti-democratic play, and the fascists went to applaud it at the Théâtre Français around 1934. Whereas recent performances of it at the Piccolo Teatro in Milan have brought out just the opposite. The play's critical attitude toward an examination of dictatorship as a mystification of the masses. Though, of course, it is obviously not democracy, but legitimate and hereditary monarchy that Shakespeare was really contrasting with the dictator. Have these metamorphoses always happened? More or less, I suppose, but at the great moments in the history of the theater, there was a real homogeneity of author and audience, for the audience was more or less consciously experiencing in its own life the contradictions that the author was putting on stage. There can be no doubt that Antigone represents the conflict between the great aristocratic families in the course of their breakup and the city which is establishing itself by limiting their power, as indeed Hegel observed. There can be no doubt that the Athenians felt deeply concerned by the conflict between Antigone and Creon. The theater, therefore, had a united public, just as in 17th century England, when the language was being continually enriched and the absolute monarchy was establishing itself. It was the English nation that was becoming aware of itself through the Elizabethan drama. Nowadays, the audience is drawn from too many different social groups and sometimes has too many conflicting interests for anyone to be able to foretell how such a diversified public is likely to react. In any case, the theater belongs, by and large, to the bourgeoisie. It's the bourgeois who support and fill the theaters by acquiescing in the contrast rise in box office prices. There are so many inner contradictions within the middle classes and even within the ruling class that part of the audience would probably be shocked if the drama showed an image of our society that pleased other parts of it. The result of this compromise is that the theater seldom shows the changes in man and the world, but rather the image of man as eternally unchanging in a universe that never changes. A striking example is the way the audience laughed at scores of points in La Petite Hutte. Now, what is La Petite Hutte about? Supposing we change all the circumstances of the bourgeois triangle, that is, wife, husband, and lover. We put them on a desert island, and what happens? The triangle remains one way or another. Nothing has changed. Nothing changes. And the audience is delighted. But we all know that the world changes, that it changes man and man changes the world. And if that is not what the basic subject of any play should be, the drama no longer has a subject. But isn't that exactly what Bertolt Brecht deals with in all his plays? Exactly. It is often claimed that he means to give a Marxist interpretation of the world in its entirety. That isn't quite true. Of course he is a Marxist. Profoundly so. But as a dramatist, personal dramas are nevertheless what he is interested in. What he intends to do is simply to show that there is no personal drama which is not wholly conditioned by the historical situation, and at the same time no personal drama which does not react on the social condition and condition it. That is why his characters are always ambiguous. He brings out the contradictions in them, which are the contradictions of their time, and he wants simultaneously to show how they make their own fate. I am thinking of Brecht's Galileo. In Brecht's plays, he is shown as wholly conditioned by the moment at which he is living, a moment when emerging science is at odds with the traditions, beliefs, and interests of the church and the aristocracy. And the very man who embodies science is the first to play it false. Why? Because his physical courage fails, but above all because he has not understood that his lot was not cast when the great ones of this world, but with the part of society which conditions science because it has need of it in order to develop. At that time, it was the bourgeoisie. Once he has chosen the camp of the prelates and princess, Galileo refuses the support of the bourgeoisie. So Galileo is responsible for his fate. He makes it. But at the same time, his error is only explicable at a time when the man of science was in some sort the servant of the lords and prelates, and when he consequently did not know who he himself was, even while he was creating what would transform his situation. How did Brecht manage to prevent his work from being changed by his public? First of all, because despite all its problems, all its deeper contradictions, all its inner tensions, the public in East Germany is relatively unified. This society, in the course of construction, whatever one may think of it, furnishes an audience for the theater which has anxieties and hopes in common, and does not come, as in France, from all sorts of different levels. This is demonstrated by the fact that we have only come to understand the art and meaning of Brecht's plays because he first had his successes elsewhere. But Brecht's plays were written before this unified society came into existence. Yes, but his real successes came after it did. Are you sure? Brecht was a success in Germany long before Hitler, under the Weimar Republic, and later in New York, during the Nazi period. He is having a great success at the present moment in Western Germany, Switzerland, and London, so he transcends that unified public of his. Quite true, but look at the difference between the Brecht of today and the Brecht at the time when the Three-Penny Opera was being performed in Paris. Nowadays we know what Brecht is, but when we saw the Three-Penny Opera with Simone de Beauvoir before the war, we only saw what is usually called a social satire. It was very amusing, it was delightful, but Brecht's real intention was entirely lost on us. More than 20 years ago, after I'd seen the play, and here's a prime example of a play being changed by its audience, I thought it was purely anarchist. For the bourgeois are all corrupt, the chief of police is a crook. But on the other hand, the play shows us the masses as beggars and their leaders as thieves who deceive them. I entirely missed this
positive aspect of this two-edged criticism, as indeed the whole audience did at the time. All the same, Pabst's film of it was viewed in France as leftist. That was the general view of the Threepenny Opera, because the bankers and the police were the butts. But a right-wing author, too, can satirize bankers. It all depends on how it's done. Such misconceptions disappeared once Brecht could deal directly with his audience. He decided to let the audience join in the game, and since the audience collaborates with the author in any event, he gave a direction to this collaboration. A play is an animated image of man and of the world as an image presented to him. The question is the relation between audience and image. I believe that what Brecht was trying to destroy was the participation which is the ordinary bourgeois dramas, not the classical dramas' relationship with the audience. Participating in the performance means, for instance, more or less identifying with the image of the hero as he faces death, or with the image of the hero in love. It means fearing that the lover will be betrayed, or that the hero will end up by being killed. Participation is the experience of an almost carnal relationship with an image, not merely a knowledge of it, just as you cannot really know someone you fall in love with, someone for whom you experience a violent passion. If you participate, and this is what troubled Brecht, you change what you participate in. It has even been claimed, and quite truly, that a bourgeois can in fact participate in a play with a true hero, a revolutionary who transcends the conditions within himself and overcomes them through his death. Why is this? Because it will not disturb the bourgeois. Because a bourgeois can, after all, identify with such a hero. Just as people can say personally, I'm in favor of Algérie Français, but I have every respect for the FLN militant who faces death heroically. So a spectator may say, when a leftist resolves the contradictions within himself and dies heroically for a certain sort of society, I'm against the sort of society he wants, but I can't help seeing him as the image of a man who has succeeded in reconciling conflicting parts of his nature. I too have these conflicts, though of a different sort, and this story shows me that they can always be overcome. He will go away satisfied. He will have understood that in any society, in any situation, personal contradictions can be resolved. And consequently, while he rejects the substance of the play, he will be attracted by the formal design of heroism. In this sense, the positive hero of Soviet plays does not disturb the bourgeois spectator. Brecht believed that overcoming a difficult and contradictory situation was never a purely personal matter, but that only an entire society within the current of history could transform itself. He wished the spectator to leave the theater feeling disturbed, that is, grasping the causes of the contradiction, but quite unable to overcome it by indulging in a flood of emotion. People ought to be just as disturbed when they leave Tartuffe. As I see it, the classics have a very definite link with Brecht. You find both withdrawal and distancing in them. I don't believe that people really are very much interested in Orgon's Ultimate Fate or Elmayer's. Tartuffe is certainly repugnant, but he is not a horror. He does not really disturb you much. You laugh, but in moderation. It's mainly in the distancing that the power of the play lies. What Brecht wanted, and what our classical dramatists tried for, was to cause what Plato called the source of all philosophy, surprise, making the familiar unfamiliar. Incidentally, Voltaire used this method in his tales. All you have to do is to present characters from another world. Then you can laugh at them, because you tell yourself as you leave the theater, why, that world is my world. The ideal in Brecht's drama would be for the audience to be like a team of ethnographers, suddenly coming across a savage tribe, and after they had approached him, finding that they were in fact exactly like themselves. It is at such moments that an audience comes to collaborate with an author, when it recognizes itself but in a strange guise, as if it were someone else. It brings itself into being as an object before its own eyes, and it sees itself, though without playing itself as a role, and thus comes to understand itself. You were saying a moment ago that the mainspring of a play should be Plato's surprise. Do you think that is all that's needed? Are there no other links between spectator and stage? Wouldn't that be rather a frigid performance? No doubt, but that was not what Brecht wanted. All he wanted was that the spectator's emotions should not be blinkered. After all, his wife Helene Weigel, who was also one of his best interpreters, reduced audiences to tears in Mother Courage. To show and simultaneously to move would be ideal. I don't think Brecht would have considered that contradiction an absurdity. It all depends on the perspective you take when you want to tell a story. Either you take the eye of eternity, things are so, they will always be so, women will always be the eternal feminine, and so on. If so, you fall back on the drama of human nature, which I call bourgeois. Or you look at it as a sign of the beginning of a movement, or the continuation of a liquidation, that is to say, from the historical point of view, or better, the point of view of the future. In The Doll's House, which dealt with the emancipation of women at a time when it was barely thinkable, Ibsen chose the perspective of the future. It was from the point of view of the future that he saw the collapse of the domineering and vacuous husband, and Nora's liberation. An imminent, a very near future. Do you see this incorporation of a near future in your own plays? I haven't given it much thought so far. I made some attempt at it in The Condemned of Altona. The whole play is constructed from the point of a future which is at once true and false. The condemned man's madness consists in avoiding a sense of guilt, as he considers himself the witness of a vanishing century and appeals to a higher court. Naturally, everything he says is stupid. He is not narrating what the century really is. But I want the audience somehow to feel as if it were up before that court, or quite simply up before the centuries to come. Our century will be judged as we judge the 19th or 18th century. It will take the place in history which in some sense it will make for itself, and it will call for a morally objective judgment of the men of this century. I want the audience to feel, by means of my character's confused ramblings, that it stands before that court. Castles in Spain, of course. But if it could be done, it would give the audience an impression that it is shifting into the past. I want to give the feeling of our age as this century goes on, just as people say at the end of every year. 1959 was not so good. Let's hope 1960 will be better. I want the audience to see our century from outside as something alien, as a witness, and at the same time to participate in it, since it is in fact making this century. There is one feature peculiar to our age, the fact that we know we shall be judged.
That's really clever.